All right, it's on.
Ready to go?
Ready to go?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stacy Dorr. I am with Hazardscape, and I'm from Siksika Nation. History for myself is I've been doing emergency management for almost 30 years and a first responder. So today what we're going to be talking about is a few things, just briefly, so we'll give you a taste of what's coming up in the future lessons that we're going to be teaching. One, you're talking about what is the role as a emergency management coordinator, if that's what you're called in your community, or director of emergency management, which was traditionally what the name was. The title was given in all First Nations communities. Next, we'll talk about how leadership needs to know what your role and responsibility is. And once they know, the biggest thing for a First Nations emergency management coordinator or director of emergency management is the delegated authority that they're given. That's very, very important, because without that delegated authority and exactly what you do for the community is going to make a huge difference. So let's get started. So first, we're going to talk about an EM coordinator. Or you could be called the DEM, Director of Emergency Management. So your responsibility as the EM coordinator and the DEM is providing that response to any emergency within your community that's outside the day-to-day operations for, let's say, the fire department, housing, public works, various departments within your community. The EM coordinator, I'll just stay with that for now, because that's what ISC has given funding for all the First Nations. What your job is to, one, is to talk to all the heads of the departments and introduce yourself. Let them know what your role is, how you can help and work together. And what I mean by work together is when it actually comes to an event or an incident happens in your community, all the departments have to work together, and you're just leading them and guiding them through the whole incident or event. And an event or an incident could be winter storm, power outage, where the roads are snowed over. There could be a blizzard, and that's going to be a response, especially in the First Nations. We're looking at our elders that are going to be at home. There could be medical needs. Plus, that too is coordinating with the director of public works, because with that incident with a snowstorm, as an example, you can actually get reimbursed through this program called EMAP. We won't talk about it today, because that's on another session, but that's what an EM coordinator basically will do, is work with all the different departments. So you've got EM here, you've got public works, you've got housing, and other departments. The best way for an EM coordinator is to start talking at the same level. And the reason why I say that is because depending on how your structure is in your administration, there's two things that always an EM coordinator has troubles with if they're not in the proper title or at the same level as all the directors of different departments. If you're above them, what ends up happening is you get resentment here, and they are wondering why they have to answer to you. If you're below them, it's the opposite. So what ends up happening is you're trying to implement any courses, any meetings, any training, any meetings with them, and they're going to be telling you, I have to go through your supervisor. And the biggest thing for an EM coordinator, to get anything done, it slows everything down. And that's always been the biggest issue for First Nations emergency management. is they put emergency management under whether it be public works, the fire service, and you have to climb the ladder just to get a meeting with the directors of housing, public works, or any other department that you want to work with. Also, to leadership. It takes a long time for you to talk when it comes to chief and council, and that can hinder your strategies that you want to accomplish for the year, or to get buy-in from all the different departments. So that's kind of the rundown of the first part where the EM coordinator that you need to be prepared for. As an EM and a director of emergency management, EM coordinator, your job is to start looking at what preparedness would look like in your community and tailor it to your community. So whatever incident or disasters that you've been having to deal with in terms of over the past 10 years, 5 years, get all the stats. Once you narrow that down, you can start looking at what is a priority for yourself. That's the first thing. I'm going to talk about a few things, and again, we're going to get more in detail with the EM coordinator position a little more later on. However, the biggest questions that are always asked are, what do I do day to day? What is my role? How do I start? What's my first step, second step, third step? The number one thing is you need to build this connection with the different department heads and explain to them how you can help and work together when it comes to event or incident. Also, too, when we talk about EMAP, how they get reimbursed, whether it be for a snowstorm, flooding, you name it. Okay, so after this, you've established yourself as a coordinator. Now the biggest thing is now, when you start doing planning strategies, it's leadership. Chief and council, we'll call it. Chief and council. This is going to be your biggest role that you're going to have to face in the very beginning. So from experience, what you're going to have to do is you're going to sit down with leadership. You're going to have your job description, what your plans are going to be in the very beginning, and talk to leadership, chief and council, and say, what are their expectations? Once you've heard their expectations and you've told them what you can do as an EM coordinator, then now you've narrowed it down, and now chief and council and you both know where you stand. You both know that they don't call you on day-to-day emergencies, whether it be, let's say, just a grass fire or an accident, right? That's, if you have a fire department within your community, that's theirs. The only time EM gets called in with those is if it expands. And what I mean by expand is grass fire. It starts off as a grass fire the department can handle, the wind picks up, and now it's starting to affect the community, which means a lot of smoke, the fire is expanding, it's going towards the houses, it's going to start causing damage, and also too, lives are going to be at stake. That's when the emergency management coordinator can come in and help the fire department pass off to you, working on evacuations, working on where they're going to go, where your evacuation centers, so they can focus on fighting the grass fire. And that's always the biggest thing, is that if they're fighting the grass fire, they can't evacuate. When you have that understanding and you talk to chief and council that that is your role, and what your role is going forward, training, preparedness, what that looks like, how the community is going to be involved, what is your strategy with the community, the elders, everyone in the community. The chief and council will know exactly where you're going for the year and what your role is. So they're not calling you on to take care of things that maybe you don't even have to do, because here's the thing. When you have that clarification with council, you're not going to upset public works, housing, if leadership is telling you that they have an emergency and you have to go deal with it when it can be dealt with within their departments. The last thing with chief and council is, once everything is done, you need to have very important, a delegated authority. What I did for myself, and I've talked to other First Nations, is talk to chief and council, write up a BCR, get them all to sign it, and that's your delegated authority when you either do a state of local emergency or just when an emergency turns into a big incident. That's when you will come in and help coordinate with the other departments, the fire department, anyone, or outside agencies. So again, make sure that you're at the same level as the department heads. Next, you're going to be talking to chief and council with your delegated authority, where you stand, and just so they understand, so that there's no misleading information that if you're in charge, this is the authority you have. Everybody understands, and everyone should get a copy in the different departments. So along with that delegated authority, I'll touch on that a little bit. The delegated authority is during an incident, who is in charge, or what are you in charge of, how the departments are going to work with you, if you have the authority to call in any other resources. Also, too, is within a delegated authority is the financial understanding with chief and council that in some of these events may have to include chief and council approving some form of financial help in the beginning until you can get reimbursed by IC through EMAP. So again, there's that understanding and working with finance. That's why working with every different department, everyone will understand. And when you work with every department, the last thing is, and you talk to chief and council, they're going to be your emergency management committee. So they're going to be part of helping you train. They're going to be helping you with getting more in your budget. And everyone will work together cohesively during a major incident. And there's no bumping into each other or worried about who's doing what. It's just everyone knows their job and help your community. Once all that is done and you've established what you want to do as a coordinator, now comes the planning process. So your day-to-day, what we talked about, your day-to-day is you get into the office and you start your planning piece. And the planning is going to include this. Look at the EM plan. Two, meetings with all directors. 3, looking at the risks that are within your community. Now, with other training that you may receive as a coordinator, they talk about risk and all hazard assessment. They talk about an all hazard approach to emergency management. That's still good. However, what's going to make the difference and make you a very focused emergency coordinator is this. Do the risks that are within your community, no one else. You have a template, focus on past history of events or incidents that happened, snowstorms. If you're in a floodplain, right? How many floods do you have a year? Do you have overland flooding? You start to look at the stats and you start to focus yourself on what it is that you want to start looking at the EM plan and start editing the current one that's already there. Your predecessor before you might have already did an emergency management plan. But the thing about emergency management planning is it's a living document, so it's always changing. And with the environment and the climate always changing, it's got to be looked at every year, at least 6 months to a year. In the planning process, you start to narrow down who is going to be in your committee. You start to look at what kind of budget are you going to need for your department? When you start the planning process, when it comes to just your budget, you start to look at training. You start to look at meetings. When you're going to have meetings, you're going to start looking at textbooks. If you're going to start looking at possibly bringing in experts to help train your team. Also, too, is within that planning process, you start to give your team a schedule of training that you want to do. You could have it in stages. Stage one would be, let's say, ICS, Incident Command Systems 100, 200, 300. So you start planning that within your budget. Who are you going to bring in to teach that? Who's going to be taking what lessons? Also, too, is within that system, you're going to look at who is a good fit for operations, logistics, planning, you name it. That's what you got to start looking for and looking at your team to who is the best fit for those positions. Within that planning process, you start looking at listing everything that you want to accomplish, and then you start looking at the strategies. So your strategies are going to be, what courses am I going to bring in to my team? How many team members do I need within my community? Now, across Alberta, all the communities are different sizes, so the committees can expand and contract. So always focus on the primary people that can make decisions to be part of your committee. It could be a big committee or small committee. If it's a small committee, it can always expand. You start building up a roster to support them. Within that, also within that planning, that strategy, is you can now start looking at how many courses that you want to start telling your team that they have to take. That's going to cost money. Plus the strategy of booking time with them, being flexible. That's the biggest thing with AM coordinator, is their day-to-day job is their priority. So you have to work out with them when they can send a team, be flexible with the times. You might have to do groups in different time, but that's a great strategy. Also, too, within your strategy, keep it in stages for now. So your planning piece. So I always recommend this. Year one, what do you want to accomplish? Year two, what do you want to accomplish? This is very important because you're starting to talk to chief and council. They're looking at deliverables that you're giving for emergency management. They want to see results. They want to see that the first incident that you have, it's better than it was before. Be upfront with leadership as a coordinator, saying year one, according to your budget, these are the things that you're going to be accomplishing this year. Year two, within your budget, and year three. I always recommend to do a 3-year strategy on what you're going to do with your program, your team, and where it's going to progress to. 2 reasons. One, council loves to see that. So you know within that budget, if this is the budget here, you can either get an increase in your budget depending on the year. Also, too, if the government, the federal government, they're already planning 3 years ahead. That's their increments. Every year they plan 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. So if you can try keep that within the federal government, your budgeting might be a little bit more effective. Now, once you have your strategies, you're planning, you're doing all of that, you've talked to the department directors, you've talked to chief and council, you've got your delegated authority. Now you start getting into year one strategy, risk assessment. I recommend in the very beginning as an EM coordinator, is within your budget, get in a team that can do a thorough risk assessment of your community. And that means values at risk. What kind of major emergencies, events, incidents that you might be dealing with within your community? Could be wildfires, could be grass fires. Grass fires are just as dangerous as wildland fires. Also, too, mapping, 911 mapping. You start doing all those assessments, elders, disabilities. If there's an evacuation, what does that look like for you? You get a team in there that does a full risk assessment and a report. What that does, and is from experience, is when you go to ISC, there's funding there for emergency management. You have to apply for it. What really helps you is when you do that risk assessment and that report, that is your foundation to everything that you're going to apply for. If you're going to apply for flood mitigation strategies, equipment, that report will reflect that flooding is very, very important within your community. It's high on your risk assessment. ISC will see that report and they'll see a consistency of what you're going to do, and that will really help you get consistent funding. The last thing I'll leave with you is this. If you change your strategy and do the risk assessment, understand what your strategies and have good planning, you want to make sure that you have consistent funding through the federal government, and try not to get wrapped up in, you hear that there's funding for emergency management and you apply for a sky. You apply for $1 million, $500,000, but you don't have a plan. You don't have a strategy in how to utilize all that money, because that can hinder you for your next application, what you want to do. So again, risk assessment narrows that down, and you can start having your year 1, year 2, year 3 strategies and consistent funding all the way through it. All right. Again, my name's Stacy Dorr with Hazardscape. We're going to be talking more about emergency management for the First Nations. It's very dear to my heart. There's not a lot out there there is training out there. We've got different entities that'll come out and train. However, they don't lay out the steps and what you're supposed to do as an EM coordinator and support from day 1 to day 2. They come in, that's what they're mandated for, is just to give optimal training what you want. But if you have a strategy, you can utilize them. So again, do this process here. You dictate which agencies or specialists or anything that you want to come in and train your team, and tailor it to your nation. Thank you. I hope to see you again. And we'll talk more, and we'll dive deeper into the coordinator, leadership, planning process, and how to budget. Talk to you later.
If you like this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe for more. And if you have a question or topic idea, please leave a comment, because your comment could be our next video.